Hey, Thomas.
Hey, Tom.
Oh, Lucas.
Hey.
Hey, long time no see.
Yeah, had vacation and, and then after vacation I had to work and
Hey guys, morning or afternoon for most, I guess. All right, let me pull up my notes real quick. All right. I'll send the notes here too, so feel free to add anything if you have any specific topics. I'll try to be scribed today, so if I get distracted, that is why. All right. Hey, Ben.
Hey guys.
All right. I just linked it, but a few more people joined, so I'll go ahead and actually wait until Tom joins real quick and then set it one more time. Sorry about spam in the chat. If you don't just mind adding yourself as a participant, and we go ahead and kick it off. Hey, Tom.
Hey, how's it going?
Going well. How you doing?
It's good. I'm rushing to get all my morning things done in time.
Nice. All right. I'll link it one more time. All right. Cool. Yeah, I guess we can go ahead and kick it off. I think everyone's basically attended one of these meetings, I believe, right? So if not, feel free to introduce yourself, but I think we're all good. All right, looks like Thomas, you have your first topic on there.
Yes, I was actually working on a Java SDK and like doing a provider. And what I noticed is like when we use set provider in the SDKs, like the initialization state is async, which is what was decided back in the days. But I found it like a bit weird for people using the SDKs because they probably will have their first evaluation with an answer as provider not ready. And I was like just wanting to bring it, like if we want to introduce something that being sure that when you use set provider, you can wait to have a ready state from your provider before being like having a waiting state and not having to put listener and all of this to get notified from that, because it's a lot of overhead if you want to do that compared to what vendors are doing actually. In if you look at Flagsmith or even LaunchDarkly, they just like you initialize it and you can use it right away. You don't have to add extra stuff to wait to be ready when you initialize your SDK. So I'm not saying it's a wrong pattern that we're using. It's more like, should we add another way of being sure that
Like
we have
syntactic sugar or something? Yeah, I talked to Todd about something similar in the JavaScript one where you basically just have like you register it and it's just like await this until it's ready or throw or whatever the behavior would be. I think that makes sense. Yeah, I would agree with that. Todd, do you have any thoughts, and what would you like to do as kind of a next step?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a one-liner in JavaScript, for instance, to just like basically set a handler, add a handler, and await the like basically resolve the promise with the fire of the handler. It's a little bit more complicated it's slightly more complicated in Java, I think, and other languages that aren't so callback friendly, async await, native to async await. I think I am in favor of some kind of convenience methods, but there's some stuff we have to think about around them. Like my naive kind of initial first blush reaction after talking to Thomas, and I put something. There's a good, I don't know, Thomas, if there's that Slack thread you want to link in here, because maybe people will like to read it.
Yeah.
But was something I put in, I think, a different thread with Thomas was, yeah, maybe just like a wait for provider ready, and you could supply a provider name or just none for the default, and it would block until the provider is ready, which I think would feel natural for a lot of use cases. I guess that I have a couple open questions there. It's like, well, really you'd be awaiting initialization. So does that throw if initialization fails? I'm inclined to say probably yes. Is there like a default timeout and then you throw after that timeout? Does it not throw and then all your stuff is defaulting with error messages or error evaluations after that? There's a few open questions, and maybe it's not even something we want to spec out, because I don't know if it really is the same in every single SDK. I think, things are very different. Like Go has channels, JavaScript, like I said, has async await and promises, and then Java is more thread. Threads are more kind of part of the paradigm. So I don't know if it's something we want to spec out, but it's at least something we should consider SDK to SDK, what we want that like waiting for ready to look like if you're kind of waiting for it in an imperative and blocking way, what the behavior should kind of be. We should at least discuss it and maybe consider specifying it like as an optional thing, but at least if we do that, it'll be somewhat consistently implemented. That's my two
what about
cents.
maybe like just starting like an OFAP just to have like this discussion captured somewhere, even if it doesn't end up going like into spec necessarily, but just having like the discussion log captured in essentially an issue in a pull request. Thomas, would you mind putting like the initial draft together and we can work through it on there?
Okay, open like an issue or pull request for an OFAP for this. No risk.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, anything else on that topic?
I had a question in general about the events and basically the way that we set them and then we emit them, and so like the first question that I have is, I think like in general whatever that is in the specs right now is more like state than events, because like you just want to say that, hey, like the provider is ready, or like provider is like in error state or in the state. The reason that I'm saying that is a state more than an event, because events are normally like fire and forget, like you actually emit something and then you don't keep it anywhere. And then when you listen to that again after the emit is emitted, you don't get the like replay kind of like that the event was actually happening. So you might come to some sort of like racing issue if, like, for example, if you set the provider and then provider like somehow emits the signal that, hey, like I'm ready, and then like in some other frames you just like set the handler, and then do we expect that we get this like emitted event again? So we go directly forward with the whatever we want to do. And then is it kind of, because I think it wasn't really specified anywhere in the specs that this like events should be replayed when you listen to that again, like add a new handler, for example. Yeah, so that's actually the first question.
It actually is. The point probably needs to be expanded, as came up recently, but there is a specific point about ready handlers specifically replaying. But I think that ready handler, as well as the error handler, basically any handlers that correspond to those provider state changes, need to be replayed. Right now, the spec point only says the ready handler. I can get you the point that specifically says it, but it's exactly to handle the use case you're describing, where your provider is ready, and then immediately, because that's a totally different section of code, you add a ready handler, and you might not get it because your provider was ready before you added the handler. That exactly. Handler should run, and that is there. I can show you the point, but the point should actually also apply to error handling. Kavindu pointed that out, I think, a couple weeks back, and I don't think we've amended the spec to say that, but it probably should be amended to mention that.
So I think that it was kind of mentioning that this is not like really events. It's like we want to keep provider states and observe the provider states. So then observing the provider states kind of like also indicate that we want to keep all of like basically the last state. Like, is it error, or is it like ready? And another thing is, what about re-emission? Like, for example, imagine middle of the app session, something is changed. Like, you just say that, hey, I want to add age right now because the user inputs that. And then the context is changed. Then I want to emit like stale again, and then ready again, and then imagine that you have a compose app, and then first you are actually listening for this handler that provider ready. Does that emit again? So does it mean that, imagine that your first screen, like a login screen or whatever, is like, so should we listen for the first emission? Like, should we state that?
That's a really good question. And actually, I'll link this in the chat and in the doc. Somebody brought this up, Billy Lynch. I think, yeah. So I put it in the chat here. I'll also put it in the doc. Sorry. But I think it's a question around what you're saying. The thing is that this is more of a concern specifically for the client, which is probably why it's something that you've thought a lot about, because I know you've spent a lot of time working at Kotlin. When we're talking about the server, the change in the context, the context is dynamic. It basically changes every single request. It's like a transient thing. So you wouldn't really want to emit events around that context being changed, really, because it's basically part of every single flag evaluation. On the client, when we have the static concept paradigm, or the static context paradigm, or the, we call it the static context paradigm, but basically what it means is we expect that there's kind of this conscious and change around the context being mutated, and then we hook in functionality to that. So I think that's kind of what you're describing. And this issue was open to kind of add kind of eventing around that and notifications around that. Does that kind of relate to what you're talking about? Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, what I was thinking, like a potential solution would be like, utilize this for kind of mid-session updates, utilize some other event like for like configuration updated or something like that, or provider updated, and then like the provider is ready, like it doesn't change the state, but it has some effects, something happened, like you can miss it and it's okay to miss it, but yeah.
Yeah, I totally think this is important in the client. It's something that I think we kind of didn't think about implementing when we first did this static context paradigm, but after this issue was opened, I personally think it's pretty necessary to be able to observe and react to that situation. So I definitely think we need to refine the issue a little bit. I'd love your and anyone else's input on the issue that I linked, but I think I would love to see this enhancement. It's going to be really useful for the client. I don't really see it as applicable on the server, so we'll have to be careful to specify that it's not really an event that's going to matter too much there. I can't imagine why you would care if the static context is changed when you have it updated at every flag evaluation. But for the case of the client, I think it's definitely relevant.
Yeah, we actually also added something like in the Kotlin, like Kotlin SDK, which is like we use suspending for provider ready. So we await provider ready, and then that makes sure that we do it only once. So like the first time that, like, we just check that as soon as the provider is ready or is already ready, then go to the next line.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I think we let's work through this pull request. It's linked in the docs real quick, but I do think it's something that we can work through kind of asynchronously or chat about in the next session if necessary. Perfect. Yeah, thanks for the feedback there. Todd, looks like you're next.
Yeah, sorry, I lost track. Yeah, this should be pretty quick. I'll put another link in the chat just so everybody knows what I'm talking about. There's a document status section in the spec. Here it is. And this basically outlines the stability of basically particular features in the SDK. I think we're doing a little bit of a disservice to our consumers because we've marked some of these sections as stable, sorry, not as stable, as hardened or experimental. It's not really exposed to them very well. Like I wouldn't expect any consumer of any SDK to go be like, oh, this SDK features events, and then run out to the spec and see the stability level of events is experimental, and therefore we can make breaking changes without doing a major version update. That's kind of what this contract stipulates. Yeah, I think we're a little bit doing a disservice to our consumers by not making that very clear to them, because they have to go to the spec to get that information. So I'm interested in how we can maybe expose that in the SDKs. Like a contributor to the Java SDK, Giovanni, was saying you could use annotations on methods. A lot of times people pull open the source sometimes when they look at the contracts. That's one way to do it, but I'm interested in what other people think. Maybe it's like JS doc, Java doc, inline doc kind of thing, to at least mark experimental features. And then I guess the corollary, the related thing is, do we want to think about kind of graduating some of our features, especially now that we've had events out for a little while. We've released the client SDK for the web at least. And we're coming up on a year, I think, since our first 1.0 soon. So just putting that out there to people.
It's tricky. I can't think of any language other than, I mean, Java has like deprecations as almost like a first-class citizen, doesn't it? And I don't think many other languages do. I can't think of any.
Yeah, the annotation based thing came from gRPC. So gRPC basically has a no-op annotation in a couple of their implementations where they just like put this annotation on a method and it says like experimental. It does absolutely nothing. But if you look in if you right click and go to the definition, you'll see there that it's experimental. It's something. I don't know if anybody has other ideas though.
I mean, I guess the one thing we should be clear about is like, if it does land on the spec, like we need to do everything we can to avoid breaking changes. Like, even if it is marked as experimental, and I think with that in mind, it's like, as long as we're very careful and we do have to make it, we just basically would, if there is JS doc or something, you could say that obviously above the different portions. And I also, one of the topics I wanted to talk about was an updated README. Like maybe we could add it in there, just say like, it's available, but kind of use with caution or whatever. We could add the little disclaimer there. And then if we do make any breaking changes, we just have to, obviously very clearly state that in the README or the release notes, and possibly like a migration plan if possible. So I don't know. I think anything else would probably be either too difficult to maintain or kind of become out of date or something fairly quickly.
I think like bumping a Semver major version is, I think that's probably like the most like well understood. Like we've had this a few times before, and then we've had customers who just like go from major version 2 to major version 4, and then like, why is the code broken? And it's like, did you that happens occasionally, but I think generally people are fairly like, I think people would be more cognizant of a Semver major version change than like, I don't know, maybe a deprecation would be good, but I don't think many people would be looking in the source code potentially either. I don't know. I think you can lean on Semver fairly heavily these days, my experience.
Yes, especially if you wouldn't, and if you like would not change the version maybe to a major, if you remove something that has been experimented. I mean, tooling would break in many cases. Tooling that would automatically, I don't know, increase version numbers or dependencies or so. On the other hand, I think it could happen that we get quite conservative on doing experimental stuff if we go for the other route, because it would always mean a new major. And in the end, we end up with like version 100 dot whatever. Also hard, I'm not sure.
Yeah, agreed with Thomas on the thing he just put in chat. The two, this is a bit of a side point, but man, I hate major versions in Go. Anything past the one in Go feels like a nightmare for maintenance.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Okay. So I definitely think we should review the document status, if nothing else. And then I think we'll just have to be careful and where appropriate, do a major version bump. I think that like that is the easy way to do it, of course. Like that's the whole point of like the versioning scheme like that. And yeah, so maybe it's more case by case basis, and we'll have to just use our use the situation, I guess, to decide what version makes sense.
I think also
maybe it's just.
Sorry, go on, Tom.
Go ahead, Ben.
Okay.
No,
We've had this, one of the things that if we could go back and change is like there's been some upgrades we've made to our SDKs where it's been difficult for us to hard fail if people are like if there's a version mismatch between the SDK and the API, and then they just sort of like things silently, you know, like rules silently don't work as expected or whatever. So if there's opportunities to build in like hard failures into the OpenFeature SDK at that point, rather than just like no-opping stuff or whatever, that's, you know, that's probably a good approach as well. I wish we'd have done that a bit more.
Yeah, that's one of the changes that we made going from Tapplytics to DevCycle is like there's certain things we just hard fail, we hard throw an exception or something on, and it's made our lives a lot easier because there's so many exceptions of SDK exceptions that you're talking about in our backend code for Tapplytics, where we just have like, if you're this version of Android or whatever to fix this thing, like we have this like this random exception, and it's just like it's a nightmare to maintain.
Yeah, and I'm guessing in both those cases that when what you guys are talking about is failing really quickly on startup, probably not at some arbitrary point at runtime, which I think is like something that yeah, I agree. I think we should kind of encourage that as a policy. We have like a never throw policy with the exception of configuration. So I guess the corollary is throw please during your configuration if something is invalid or doesn't make any sense. I think I would encourage SDK implementations to like trend that direction.
All right.
Just to drive this point home, I think maybe I'll do a review of the spec and open an issue like with some things that we might move to hardening or even stable. But like a good example of something that, you know, just we talked about today that is probably along the lines of a potentially breaking change, right? As Thomas was talking about this, the set provider and whether or not it returns immediately or blocks in Java. That if we change set provider to block, that would probably constitute like a breaking change. So those are and I don't think that we're talking about doing that, but like those are the types of things that we need to be really careful about doing, especially before we mark something hardening or stable. We want to make sure that like the horse, you know, the horse is out of the gate once it's stable. So we got to be careful about that kind of thing.
All right, perfect. Yeah, it sounds like that's a good next step, Todd, if you don't mind reviewing our statuses and highlighting the ones that are ready for the next stage. Dominic, it's like you have the next topic.
Yeah, it's maybe not a topic, but a question, because usually Kubernetes is used for bigger systems. So So basically, if you have something you want to scale, there's a higher chance that you also use the features. And Kubernetes offer the native nice deployment features with rolling binary update. And I was thinking, was there any discussion or something about considering adding something similar for features for Kubernetes? You can use, of course, add-on for Kubernetes to use the features, but if at some point it will make sense to use the features in the Kubernetes and have the one common API for that, maybe it should be a part of Kubernetes itself. I was just wondering if there was any discussion about that.
No, not really. I mean, probably the closest thing is we had like the OpenFeature operator, which does a little bit of that, but it's not like natively built into Kubernetes, nor have we really talked to the team about that. I mean, it's interesting. I don't entirely know how it would work, but if you have a proposal or something, I'm happy to take a look at it.
Okay, I will think about that, because we are now working on not only using Google internal solution, but also encourage people to use more open source solution in Google. And of course, Kubernetes is a very basic choice for such a system.
It's fairly popular. I'm sure it's popular at Google as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Yeah, if you want to put something together, just kind of what your thoughts are. I think I understand what you're getting at, but being able to like read through the doc would probably allow me to understand it a bit better.
Okay. I will prepare something. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Cool. Just a reminder, I link it one more time. If anyone else has any agenda items, please feel free to add it. Does look like I have the next couple. Just want to let people know we've updated the OpenTelemetry hooks primarily in JavaScript, meant for Node primarily, Java and Go. One kind of cool part is we have two separate hooks now, one for traces and one for metrics. And we also have the ability to, especially in JavaScript, so you can check out that implementation, but the other ones will probably quickly follow. You can basically register a callback that would allow you to take flag metadata and add them as dimensions. And so that what that would allow you to potentially do is set things like, this was the project ID, this was the environment ID, whatever else that would have to come from, the management tool itself. But that would allow you to kind of slice and dice and say, like, this was the, a particular evaluation for this feature flag in this project in this environment and things like that. So it's completely like neutral. You can do it with whatever backend, assuming that data is supplied. But it should allow for some really interesting, granularity and use cases. So if you have a second, definitely take a look at it, but it's a pretty cool new powerful feature. Next one is some README improvements. So I've been looking at basically improving our README templates for all the SDKs. So all the SDKs kind of read in a similar way and provide useful examples. I have a pull request open in the Go SDK, and I'll link it in the docs when I finish talking. But if you don't mind taking a look at it and reviewing it, because if we like that style, I'll just update the core template, and we'll try to update all SDKs to follow this. The nice part about it is I'm trying to highlight kind of like the initial like user happy path to get them set up quickly, but then also like highlight each feature that's available in the particular SDK. And it's basically in preparation because I've also worked on some tooling to suck in those READMEs into the documentation and kind of do some basic like massaging on it so it looks nice in our docs. And so that way we only have to really maintain the SDKs and then it will get pulled into the docs and look nice. So I'll link both of those pull requests in the notes in just a second. But definitely some feedback on that would be great, because the follow-up would be once we have kind of this automatic README ingest or whatever we want to call it, to build out some kind of like support matrix. Then we could show like, the SDK is in this maturity level and it supports this spec and all of that stuff. We can do that basically automatically when we pull in these various SDK READMEs. So that's kind of part of the plan. I think it would definitely help people kind of discover, Java is this far along, but Rust is not far along at all type of thing, and possibly even help, attract some maintainers for the different SDKs. So that's it for that. And then the React SDK. So now that we have the client side in a pretty good spot, I think the next, one of the next really useful SDKs would be React. Of course, there's like a million different frameworks and stuff that would be potentially useful, but React seems to have kind of been dominating recently, and it's certainly something that would be nice even for like our playground app. And so I think it makes sense to at least start the discussion of like what we would like that to look like. In the past, we've talked about it basically being like an extension to the JavaScript SDK itself, and it's just had, provides hooks and some nice, kind of React focused tooling around it. And I kind of like to start that conversation, because I could also see similar patterns being applied to other things. Like if we wanted to do, specific integrations with some, backend tooling, like, I don't know, Nest.js or whatever. We could start basically just applying like framework specific wrappers around our SDK. And so, yeah. Todd, I think, have you created that issue yet? If not, we may want to knock that out today, and we can add it to the notes and kind of start the conversation of like what we would like this, what we want the SDK to look like and feel like, and make it as friendly as possible to React developers in this case.
I can't remember if I created it or not. I definitely created it in my brain. Whether or not I created it on GitHub is a different question.
Yeah,
So,
GitHub's more important, but I think we can knock that out today, and I'll update the notes once it's live. So,
Yeah, I had a question about the React library.
Okay.
So so we're using like Postdoc, and Postdoc started charging for each feature flag request. And at the moment, our OpenFeature is really living around like doing a feature flag check per like each time we want to check if a flag is enabled or not. And I wonder, so Postdoc has this bit more costly event they call it, where you can basically get all the enabled flags for a specific context or a user. And I was wondering if that's something we want to add to the OpenFeature client too, so you can just query all active feature flags for a user, or is it something?
So kind of like a bulk evaluate for like the developer. So we had talked about it at one point. I mean, technically it's possible, but there was some like, it was kind of discouraged for a couple of reasons. We could pull it back up as a discussion point, but like even in the SDK,
I actually don't think, hearing what was said, I don't think that a bulk evaluation is actually what is being called for. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that our web SDK might actually solve this problem for you, at least partially, because we do have the knowledge of when the context has changed. So you could, for instance, bulk evaluate in your provider, but not expose that to, and then cache everything, but not expose that to the actual SDK, right? So if your provider is just when a context attribute is changed, or when a user first logs in or whatever, does a bulk evaluation, you can just store all those flags and then evaluate them and return them whenever you want. I don't really think that a bulk evaluation per se, Mike, is particularly relevant if your goal is just to reduce traffic to the backend that you're talking about. I think the knowledge of when the context has changed will basically facilitate that for you. Unless I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah, it's mostly a cost. So.
Okay, yeah, okay. So I do think that was potentially covered, but definitely let us know if something's missing. But just to kind of close up the bulk evaluation, there's a couple reasons why that was discouraged, and it was partially around it can be kind of expensive for the ones that have to do like individual calls, which isn't the primary well, it is a huge concern in the ones that's an expensive operation, but the other one was like, it makes analytics borderline useless then, because you basically like have no idea if a flag was actually used or not, because it would be, well, they're all gathered and we're not tracking like actual usage at that point. So yeah, there's a couple reasons why we were discouraging the bulk evaluation point, but there is, I think, an issue still open for it. So if it's something that you'd like to look at,
Okay,
let us
I
know.
will try this first, and then I'll find that ticket and see if it's worth continuing on that one or not. Great,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
I can send you some doc, but based on what you said, I think that our kind of initialization plus context change stuff, and maybe even some events like what was mentioned earlier in the meeting could help you. But I think that you could basically do that bulk evaluation per user and then save yourself the API calls. Yeah, but I'll send you that doc.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah,
All right.
yeah, I think the React library would be nice to have. I can try if I can get something to work the coming week.
Cool. Yeah, I think if we get that issue out there, it'd be really nice to kind of get everyone's thoughts on how it could and should behave. Hopefully from a code perspective, it's not too bad, because a lot of it would be offloaded on the SDK, I think.
Yeah, it would be interesting for me too. We kind of wrote something for a customer because yeah, they wanted to use OpenFeature, mainly because I said it would maybe be quite a good idea, and they used React, and we built something and we learned stuff that we wouldn't do. And I think that would be interesting maybe.
Yeah, that would be really interesting feedback, Ben. So yeah, once we have that issue out there, maybe if you could do your brain dump a lesson learned, then would be pretty valuable. Awesome. Just an FYI, I did update the notes, and I have the pull request to the Go pull request and my auto gen doc pull request, which that one's still a draft waiting on the Go one, but any feedback would be really appreciated. Hoping to have that merged possibly today, at least the Go one. So if you have a chance, please take a look at it. And then Lucas, it looks like you're last potentially, unless someone else adds something.
Yeah, so that was one thing that came to my mind. We had a discussion, and we had, I'm not sure, and I don't find it right now, something that we already discussed somewhere, and that we had a longer discussion on, and someone else came and asked something and regarding that, and the answer could have been, we have decided there for those reasons that we do something like this, but we don't have that. And I just mentioned that, for example, for some stuff, I could imagine having something like decision records. It could be, for example, for why do we use NX for the mono repository? Why do we have a mono repository at all for the providers? I don't know, why do we use behavior-driven tests, whatever. Something like this that is pretty hard to change and that you can like discuss much on. And you could just like mention, okay, we decided because of this, and people can just look at something like this and say, okay, I buy that, or I see differently. Yeah, or for example, like this. And I'm actually not so sure, because I think it could become something like we start with it and it's hard to like continue on it. And so that's actually what I sometimes feel about the OFABs, because yeah, Todd said, yeah, okay, we have the OFABs, and yeah, some of that stuff that I'm asking for is actually in there. But the semantics like of OFAB and what it means is kind of different a bit. And I was just wondering, and I had the structure of something like an architecture decision record, maybe like the Michael Neigert stuff in mind. But I'm not sure how to operationalize this and here in such a context. It was just something that I want to mention because I have the feeling it could help, but I'm not too sure how we could apply it, that it also works and not just we start and let it die afterwards.
Yeah, and I definitely want to kind of avoid adding too much to the process if possible, but I like the idea. Maybe we can try to work asynchronously on that a little bit and figure out what to do, or where it could live, what the process looks like. Because even like the NX one that you brought up, like, I don't know, right? It was just like, that's the,
Yeah.
like, what's an acceptable, reason for it? Like, who can approve it? I think there's a couple questions we would have. Maybe ironically, we could create an OFAP for the process to avoid OFAPs for decision making or something. But we do, I think, need a spot to kind of talk through what we'd like to do for maybe these ones that shouldn't require this more like formalized process that maybe the OFAP covers. So
One thing that we could maybe use that would be lightweight is GitHub discussions. I mean, we could consider that. At least then we'd have like a document or something we could point back to. Because I think when I hear Lucas's what he's describing, what he's describing, it's 100% just like, we already talked about this and everybody kind of agreed, and then somebody else came along and they weren't in the discussion, and it's just like, just pointing them to that discussion that's long lived and more formal. Maybe discussions is good enough. Especially if we like structure them with kind of
or a
inspiration
label or something.
PR format. Yeah.
And maybe that could be something. And maybe we could, but the thing is, maybe it would be cool to have something where you can just look at and don't have to read a whole discussion or so, because what I would like to see is like, what was decided, okay, just because I have to know where to look, and then the why. And maybe the why is just, we thought NX is the best tool right now for monorepositories. And if I buy that, I can just accept that we use NX, for example. And if I say, okay, but I don't think so, and I think we could be way better, it's just like, you can be better in deciding if something should be discussed again or so. That's why I like it. Yeah, that's like, no.
Yeah, I think I don't have answers to all the questions, but I think it's worth talking about. Like, it would be nice to just have a spot to like kind of hammer these things out quickly and try to get general consensus. And if it's if it ends up not working out in the long run, we can reevaluate it and work through it. Maybe discussions make sense, but I don't know if you can do that org wide or if it has to be on a repo. If it can be org wide, it might be a good solution. But
I was just trying to figure that out right now, but it doesn't look like it's possible, but I could be missing something.
Okay. Yeah, let's where can we take that?
I did pop this in the chat, but something that I've seen before is just having some kind of decision record repository. The decision records are all saved, right? As part of markdown docs inside of that repository, and the discussions just inherently happen on issues or pull requests. So you also have that history of discussion as well.
There is org level discussions as well. You have to choose a hosting repository, but basically it maps org, like one repository to be like the org level repository. So that's also an option if we didn't. But yeah, the Tom's suggestion also could work. Something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, discussions could be like, I'd have to look at it because it would be nice if we could say like, we have our normal conversations in a issue or something, if we could like convert to whatever discussion or something and then label it, or like, it's just maybe an easier workflow to capture some of this. I can take a look at it a little bit too and see if maybe we can enable it for, experimenting, see if it works, and always remove it if it doesn't. I haven't used discussions much, so I don't know if it's a good approach or not.
I just linked the org level settings. I think only admins will be able to see it, but yeah, it's basically like you can do org level discussions. You just have to choose an owning repo. But so that's another option. It looks like we have a few options. I'm open to any of them.
And discussion can also help for adopting people. So they start to protect their question and they can use discussion.
Yeah, discussions may be nice to enable.
Because for now you have to go to Slack and register on the CNCF1 and so on. So maybe it blocks people to ask questions.
Yeah, so I think Stacy's a big fan of discussions too, if I remember right. So I think it may be worth turning it on and seeing how it goes.
Yeah, I think Thomas's point is right. That anyone who's not on Slack, who doesn't want to join Slack, or who can't join Slack, it's another avenue for people to communicate with us, which is I'm all for.
Yeah, and if it's org-wide, I think it makes it quite clear. I mean, that is one of the challenges. We have
Yeah.
like 40 repos and like, where do you go? What questions do you
Right.
ask? All that,
Right.
so. Okay, maybe we try both then. I can enable discussions across the org and we can try to see if we can use that for possibly decision-making as well as obviously like general questions and troubleshooting. It will be pretty bare bones at first though, obviously. So if anyone has any like initial questions to kind of seed it, please do, even if you want to answer your own question. Perfect. All right.
I think we're at the end, unless somebody else wants to say something, but I wanted to circle back really quickly to something that was happening in the chat, back to Dominic's point. If I understood you correctly, Dominic, I think you were maybe proposing like making the potentially the APIs / CRDs we defined in OpenFeature operator like more general, and even maybe seeing if Kubernetes is a wider body would be interested in them. I think that's a really interesting idea. I think that like even for vendors, for instance, it would be interesting to be able to say this is a standard feature flag definition. And if everybody could at least agree on the definition, they could build their own operators or whatever that would echo these definitions into their backends. There's a lot of like agreement to be and discussion and like stuff to talk about there, I think. But I think it could be a very interesting discussion to have. And I don't know if there's a community that's better positioned to do it than this one. But it's a big topic. So if I understood you correctly, I think it's something that I would be interested in talking more about.
Okay, I'm also open for discussion.
I guess defining a standard for flag seems hard. I think it's a topic that comes super often and nobody want to take it for now. But I think like we will have to at some point just to at least contact vendors and see what they think, if it's a good idea to be the standard schema for flags or not. Because it seems that no one's want to go there for now, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe
we may have
the
to
discussion at least.
We may have to do it because I think like even vendors could like transform their definition into this like centralized one too. Like I get it, and like I don't think anyone's going to be like asking for it necessarily, but we may like from a vendor perspective, I think users certainly would potentially, but the unified flag definition is something I think we're going to have to think about quite a lot. And almost certainly something that we'll have to do eventually. It's just how do we do it, and yeah, it's gonna be tricky to navigate, but doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. In fact, we almost maybe should because it's what standardization means basically. So. All right. Yeah, is there anything else? It looks like we made it through the agenda for the day. Nothing? All right. Perfect. Well, thanks everyone. Have a nice day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
Talk to you later. See ya.